Hey, Kilted Warrior here. Hope you're having a great day. I have a question for you. What happens when the world has been reeling for 2 years since an event that shocked the world? No, I'm not just talking about COVID though, yeah, that was and is still fun. No, I mean the game that was meant to be the best game ever, but ended up crushing the hopes and dreams of a whole, not one, but 2 generations of gamers in one fell swoop. What happens is From Software finally rises from its throne of noob skulls and presents the gaming plebs with Elden Ring. It goes without saying that for many it filled the void left in our gaming hearts by Cyberpunk, yet for my part I had not played a From Software game prior, so just shrugged and got on with my life as a gaming caveman. So recently I went in blind with this game, and long story short, it was an interesting experience and I have a lot of great things to say about it, at least when I wasn't having my hopes and dreams crushed underfoot with every new boss I fought. Damn it, why am I so bad at this game? Yet, over 120 hours later, I had bludgeoned my own head against the wall of Soulsborne boss mechanics and eventually got good, or more accurately, okay at this game. My quick conclusion is that these Japanese developers at From Software are a bunch of sadistic, wonderful bastards who enriched my life, if enrichment can come from what is clearly a game that only masochists can play. Yes, I too have become a glutton for punishment with this one. I swear that Miyazaki got a kick out of our suffering, and makes sense as to why they brought the greatest sadist of fantasy writing, George R.R. Martin, in for this one. That way they could all indulge together in the suffering of millions of people. So let's indulge in the nostalgic suffering of what only giving 100+ hours of your life to pain can bring. Combat and gameplay. Well, it's a Soulsborne game at its core, and even as someone who has not played a From Software game previously, though I have played a few smaller Souls-like games by indie developers and have seen and enjoyed the countless discussions on the merits of Souls gameplay in relation to other games, so I'm aware of the system at its core. That said, the game is refreshingly simplistic in its core design as far as combat and gameplay are concerned. That is, you gather experience, runes, to purchase more power to fight even stronger and varied enemies as you go forth, in particular bosses. Hell, even the very storyline at its core simply asks you to search out the strongest bosses to progress. Yet it is beneath that simplistic, easy to follow concept that you have a multitude of mechanics that are subtle interactions between the world, combat, and gameplay. That is, it forms a loop. And they fuse together in a symphony of death, usually our deaths. That is, death, or die, die, and die again, as has been immortalized as the motto of Soulsborne games, is exactly the point of what I enjoyed about this game. You are expected to die a lot, especially in my case, and the game is built around that idea. But what do I mean by that? Well, first, combat for most of the game, whether you're facing basic foes or bosses, is visceral, deadly, and calculated. Any enemy, no matter how weak, can be lethal to you if you slip up. I can't tell you how many times I messed up with easy timing on this guy, for example, because I went in thinking I'd done it all before. He should be easy, but I kept messing up because I thought it would be easy. The game demands you respect it or it will punish you. Second, the death system is built to offer a second chance if you die and naturally avoids the death screen into save reload scenario that plagues many games I have played over the years. I'm looking at you, XCOM. No save scumming here, sir, unless you back up your saves like I did, but I swear I only did that for the story moments. I promise. Also, the game is keen to allow all other progression to be permanent and won't overly punish you as a result, so if you want to take risks you can. Once you get an item or a level up that you are looking for, the game respects you enough to let you keep it. This is not XCOM Long War where you can end up losing a campaign simply because of one bad mission causes you to lose a ton of your progress. That said, you finally have the general progression systems which are varied from the basic attribute changes, equipment, more and varied craftable consumables, as well as these spells, or sorcery I believe it's called, and incantations, which all of course are designed to feed into all the other progression systems. So it is a detailed system with a lot going for it that keeps players progressing, getting better, and the game all the while, at least for terrible players like me, likes to keep the challenge intact, with the climax being the many boss battles. The caveat being that this is most of the time it applies. So this is a good time to consider the bosses. They are a staple of Soulsborne games naturally. Obviously I knew that going in. Most are in the range of good to great, with some usually intelligent design that tests the player in various ways, but don't, shall we say, bullshit the player. That there is the problem sometimes. This game, in which I have beaten most of the bosses, I found a few cases where bosses had one of two issues that could make them quite frustrating. Those being the camera or lock-on shenanigans that can occur, and the good old one-shot kill moves that are undodgeable or at the very least difficult for you to dodge and usually require abuse of the invulnerability frames to even have a chance of getting away with no damage. I want to note that some of these battles are not in fact optional. I won't be too specific with these as it does go into spoiler territory, but two in particular come to mind that those who know the game will probably already guess the ones I'm going to refer to. One is a non-optional boss that is so large that being close to it causes a lot of weirdness with the camera and lock-on, therefore making it very difficult to telegraph its attacks, which can be lethal. That said, this particular example, this is in its first phase. The second phase of the boss is a lot easier in my experience, and this becomes less of an issue, so it wasn't too frustrating, but still pretty annoying to deal with at first. The second example is infamous and seems to be considered one of the strongest bosses in the game, though is technically optional. In this case, they had an attack which has 4 parts. It's quick, deadly on each part most of the time, and is exceptionally difficult to dodge. It involves a lot of slashing with a sword. I think any fans of this game will know what I speak of, as the boss is also made worse by the fact that they have the ability to heal rapidly. Anyway, the point is, I feel this game regarding bosses and the length could have been half the size, possibly avoiding some of the poorer designs that exist and obviously focusing on the better ones. Don't get me wrong, they are impressive with their animation work, at least the examples I'm talking of, and the tweaks could have made these very memorable boss battles. But there are more than a few bosses that went from the Soulsborne challenge to be a little too unfair, and before I get bombarded with the get good, I did still beat the bosses and this game. Yeah, I felt some had lackluster design, also back-to-back bosses, which people will also probably know I speak of, is always bad design. Changed my mind. Anyway, as for my part, I enjoyed my Confessor build, who eventually saw the light of great swords.
Tadama, and a big fucking sword.
And I completed the game by smiting all before me with holy light, lightning, fire. Seriously, the basic flame sling and the black flame are ridiculously good, and yes, I used torrent, the game's mount, to abuse the crap out of those abilities when I could. Note that it was 40 hours in I actually realised I could use spells while mounted, but boy, I never looked back. Torrent, you beautiful bastard, you trivialised some of the toughest bosses, and so I thank you. Oh, and who doesn't love using your own bad breath to kill enemies? Story, world building, and lore. Just a heads up, as this is a non-spoiler review, I will not be talking about any of the story spoilers here, for those who are wondering, so fear not, I will not be discussing specifics of the story spoilers. For those who want to see that, I will probably put up a spoiler discussion video alongside this video about Elden Ring for those who are interested, so look out for that. As far as the core story is concerned in Elden Ring, it takes the tried and true sandbox approach to the setup, with a basic grounding of the story with a singular core objective, with a few hints of where to start going forward, and then unleashes the player upon the world to tackle the story at their leisure. I won't dwell on the main story much, but simply state that it does the job in an interesting manner with a few reveals, though the endings are lackluster overall, but generally it's fine. It's not why you really play these. Where Elden Ring does shine regarding story and world building lore is the aforementioned world building and the background that it builds up, as it holds everything in this bleak but still awe-inspiring fantasy world together. It's not surprising when you have Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin, both known for their world building. Seriously, if you haven't read Song of Ice and Fire, George may vary on his character writing depending on the character, but that man knows how to build a world and lore up, and his influence can be clearly seen here, though that said, I am told Miyazaki is also brilliant at this, if the games he has worked on before are to be believed. In particular, I do look forward to Sekiro, which is meant to be sublime in this regard. Anyway, credit to them both for the world building and lore. So, I may shrug at the endings, as 4 of them are the Deus Ex Human Revolution / Mass Effect Free Fare, sadly, though the other 2 are interesting if abrupt, but the world building and the lore definitely draws you in and is largely brilliant stuff. For those wondering, I did get the so-called secret ending, though it's not really secret and is easy to get, so okay, I guess. Pathfinder Kingmaker or Wrath of the Righteous secret ending this is not. Visuals, audio, and presentation. You can't very well talk about the world building in this game and not be drawn to the presentation elements that went into creating the fantasy world of the lands between. Elden Ring, as I said in my impressions video, and it applies even as the game ends, feels like a beautiful tapestry given life, and the various paintings you find of the world before its current state throughout your exploration that you can collect proves this point. Yet it goes further than that, as the atmosphere goes a long way to immerse you in the experience, which can be difficult in a game that has plenty of weird and even comical enemy designs and some terrifying body horror thrown in for good measure. Yet I found myself stopping regularly for no other reason than to take in the vistas as the world is laid out before you, and the fact that all that you see is accessible at some point makes it even more impressive. Mix that with a nice dose of both European and Japanese fantasy tropes, imagery, and you're on to something special. Alien enough from traditional fantasy, but familiar enough not to alienate traditional fantasy fans, both European and Japanese alike. I want to bring particular attention to the weather systems as well. With the rainstorms in particular, they seem to hit a perfect note. And this scene, though seemingly scripted, is a nice run-up to a boss fight with a blinding blizzard that stays long enough with a roar in the distance before dissipating. I thought it was a particularly cool moment, and also I can't be the only person that thought there was going to be a Thor style boss battle when I first went near these lightning attracting flowers. That even after 100 hours the sound and the effects involved made me think a boss battle was just around the corner. Overall, great presentation work from a design perspective with solid voice work and good soundtrack that knows when to be bombastic but also when to be more subdued. That said, there are some issues in the presentation. At its best, it is breathtaking and beautiful, but at its worst can be downright ugly. That is, the texture work can vary greatly in quality, which is fine. Performance should always trump visuals in a game like this anyway. And the lighting, though usually great, can be suspect, as is the norm in many large open world games. Different lighting sources tend to mess with each other, particularly when you're talking about weather lighting systems, as well as independent lighting from objects and spells and so forth. So I understand why that can happen, and also I can get over the clunky feel of the jumping animations in this game. It's a small thing, but I always felt like the jumping and landing looked a bit silly. Then again, as a species, humans tend to look pretty weird when jumping anyway, I suppose. Nevertheless, overall, great presentation work, with a few minor issues here and there. Bugs, performance, and other issues. This will be brief. I had one crash and 2 freeze-ups in 120 hours, so I would call that very stable. I had no quest breaking or game breaking bugs. The only issues I noticed were occasional input lag when dodging and jumping, which I think might have been due to occasional lag spikes. Speaking of which, the game was a solid 60 frames on a 2060 Super with a 10th gen i5. GPU's usage usually hovering around 50 to 70% normally. Only certain effects from abilities or sorcery from certain enemies could cause me lag spikes, and the only real bad one was a wide bombardment that I only saw in one case in the entire game, so it was no biggie. Basically, the game ran well, was stable, and I had no major issues to speak of. This was for reference on the 1.06 patch of the game. The verdict. With my reviews, I won't be putting a number on it, as the idea of that kind of objectivity being possible in a medium like video games is simply bizarre to me, and yes, I just picked a fight with the entire traditional gaming media, and no, I will not apologise. So I will give my subjective opinion of several elements that I think go into reviewing a game. First is the value proposition. Does this game offer a good amount of enjoyable gameplay or entertainment for the price point that it's asking? In this case, with 120 plus hours that only a few were truly frustrating. Seriously, there was one boss that took me 2 days of leveling up and improving my build to beat, even though I was told it was meant to be one of the easier bosses. Anyway, at the price of just under £40 where I live, it seems like quite good value to me. At the same time, you also have the PvP element, which to me it's not my jam, as I'm content with getting my ass kicked by the AI. I don't think my ego would survive PvP, but for those who do like it, that's just even more value. So overall, I'd say it's great value for money. The second consideration is, does it run well? This simply refers to, does it maintain 60 frames per second most of the time, which I think is necessary for a good gaming experience, and does it crash often? I've played plenty of games over the years that I could not continue to play simply due to terrible performance or due to constant crashes, interrupting gameplay. This game, on the other hand, ran fine. My system is nothing special, with a 2060 Super and a 10th gen i5 processor, 16 gigs RAM. It's really not a terribly good system, but it was solid 60 frames almost the entire time. As for crashes, I only had one. I also had 2 freeze-ups, so this was in 120 hours of gameplay. To me, that's a great showing. So this was with the 1.06 patch, but it runs perfectly well for me, no issues. The third consideration, is it a replayable game, or how good is the replayability? This naturally links into the value side of things, but includes whether the game feels worth playing again. Does it have a good modding scene? Does it have game design that pushes you to replay? As well as if there's DLC expected, particularly like epilogue DLC, which might cause you to want to play again. For me, Elden Ring is mixed on this question. First, it's worth replaying, as the scope of the game does mean that you will doubtless miss a ton of things, and the game does have New Game Plus, which is always nice to be able to replay the game without being exactly at ground zero. Also, there are some mods available for the game that I've noticed that I might try. That include rebalancing, adding new skills, just general changes, armors, that kind of thing. Of course, that only really matters for PC, so feel free to ignore that element if you're not on PC. However, Elden Ring, to me, is not worth replaying for its endings, however, which is usually quite a common reason to replay games. Hence why I kept save backups of key story moments, as I wasn't sure if I'd want to replay 100 or so hours of game just for what ended up being 20-second cutscenes, but to me that is just not reason enough to replay a game. In terms of the game itself, you can basically do all the quests without being locked out in one playthrough. At least I was able to do almost all of them. So the game wasn't intrinsically designed to require multiple playthroughs like many CRPG games might, encourage due to their story and choice design. So I would say it is mixed regarding replayability. I mean, it's a really long game anyway, so again, take that into consideration with the value proposition. And it depends what you value if you want to actually replay it. I mean, if this game does get more DLC, and it does seem like it will at least get something in the future, then I will definitely replay it. Finally, considering all of those, overall, is it a good game? And is it worth a look? Yes. I think it is worth trying, and even if you only play it once, you're still in for an intriguing adventure with a game from a developer that prides itself in making the completion of their games feel like a genuine accomplishment, with a runtime that is great value for money, so I do highly recommend it. And remember, that's coming from someone who has not played other Soulsborne games, so I'm not coloured by any bias on this game. I went into it blind, effectively. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, if you liked this review, be sure to comment, rate and subscribe. Also, check out my spoiler discussion video that will be released alongside this if you're interested. I will link it below. Otherwise, have a great day and thanks for watching.